Well, hi there, everybody. What's going on? And welcome into the show. This is going to be a little bit different, but if you recall, my pal Josh Jacobs and I, long ago, like as recently as last year, used
Yeah.
to do a little show. We called it Philosophical Differences as kind of a, Josh, when we decided to call this show Philosophical Differences, it was sort of tongue in cheek about some John Mozeliak stuff that had been said at the end of the Mike Schilt era. But it also ended up being kind of funny because when you and I would do our shows together, we didn't often disagree. We often kind of came away with a very similar take on a lot of Cardinals related topics. But tonight, I saw a tweet that you had about the Erick Fedde situation, and I come at it from another angle. So we decided, all right, let's do a podcast. I need to do a podcast anyway, so I'm going to throw this on the B Shape Daily feed. But I would rather talk about this than talk about the Cardinals losing 8-0. And in some ways, we'll get to still have a conversation about tonight's game, given that Erick Fedde pitched in it and he did very, very poorly. But Josh, to set the scene, tell me, explain your tweet tonight and a little bit about your premise from the side of the argument that you come from on should the Cardinals have traded Erick Fedde in the offseason rather than let him come into the 2025 campaign with him on the roster.
Yeah, so presenting the evidence that is being talked about here, my tweet 47 minutes ago was trading Edman for Fedde isn't the problem. Holding on to Fedde this offseason is. And immediately got a bunch of responses from people because, and part of the reason I put it out there is because you just have all these people putting like the baseball reference things next to each other, MLB.com, be like, we traded NLCS MVP Tommy Edman for Erick Fedde. And at the time, I thought it was a great idea. Like, Edman hadn't played a single inning for the Cardinals that year. You had really had no idea if he was coming back and what he'd be like when he came back healthy. And you had Victor Scott, you had Michael Ciani, you had Mason Wynn, you had Brendan Donovan. It felt like there's some redundancy there, and you could go target a pitcher like Erick Fedde, who actually might have been the best starting pitcher moved at the deadline. You got Tommy Pham in the deal too. Yeah. I liked it. And so, but then they cratered in August and didn't make the playoffs, and then they went into this reset. And so when all of this happens, like initially part of the trade, obviously, is you get the extra year of control to Erick Fedde, $7.5 million, a guy who had a mid-3 ERA. Like that's, if he was a free agent last offseason, he's probably looking at closer to 20 million on a 1-year deal, not 7.5 million. All that made sense. But when you go into a reset year and you're talking about offloading money, obviously they were trying to get rid of Arenado the whole offseason. They would have moved Contreras and Gray if they wanted to. They weren't afraid to do those things. Erick Fedde seemed like the perfect trade candidate to me because you look at beneath the hood, it was a good year on paper. It really was. And I don't think he's a bad pitcher. Like, I think he's not having a good year. And I think the underlying metrics actually say that it's worse than what we've seen so far. But he's still a valuable player. And there were teams like the Guardians and there's another AL Central team, the Tigers, I believe, that were both reported that had called on him. I'm sure there's others that were interested. And to me, it makes sense that you move in Erick Fedde. You wanted to create space for Michael Mcgreevy, right? There are other free agents, and we can talk about this later, that you could have replaced him with. It all made sense to me, and they didn't do it. And so all offseason, that was like the one thing I hammered home is why are they not trading Erick Fedde? Even holding on to Ryan Helsley, I understood it because like there's not really precedent for trading a closer in the offseason, getting something valuable in return, but there is a lot of precedent for flipping that guy at the deadline. See what happens. Has it worked out for Helsley this year? Of course not. But I don't really know if there was actually any substantive offers this offseason. I have a hard time believing there wasn't a team out there that didn't want Erick Fedde. $7.5 million wasn't going to give you pretty fair value for it. That's where I'm coming from. But you disagree, and I'm interested to hear your side of it.
And actually, you mentioned Ryan Helsley, which I think is a super compelling aspect of this. I'm going to point to a trade that from either side of the aisle, you could come to this trade from the offseason and say, here's how we figured what the values were for various players, pitchers, even in the offseason. The Brewers and the Yankees make that trade where Nestor Cortez goes from the Yankees to the Brewers, and Devin Williams, who at the time we thought was this great all-star closer. I know Yankees fans feel a little bit differently about him at this point in time. As we welcome the Twitter audience, I decided to put the stream out to Twitter as well, just because if people didn't, follow on YouTube or whatever, which by the way, subscribe on YouTube to Dealin the Cards, which is the podcast that Josh is involved with. Subscribe on YouTube to the Brenden Schaeffer St. Louis Cardinals writer channel. We're both putting out a bunch of Cardinals content every week. So that should be number one. If you haven't already done so, make sure you do that. But I'm looking at that trade going, man, I just don't really know what the value would have been of an Erick Fedde, because at the time anyway, I considered Nestor to be better. You can look at Fedde's numbers last year and think that they were pretty good, and they were, especially when he was with the White Sox. And I think he was actually better with the Cardinals than people give him credit for. But I think he was the type where, like, okay, my point is this. A lot of Cardinals fans have made the argument, and I just had somebody yell at me on Twitter about it right before we went live. They said, you're crazy for this take. Everybody knew that Fedde's value was going to go down, and that was going to be when it was at its highest. If we're claiming that everybody knew that, then what do the 29 other MLB teams think of Erick Fedde's value, right?
For sure.
They're not doing this in a vacuum where, like, we, the fans, can trick them and go, now when we're going to put it over on you because his value is about to decline. I personally don't believe Fedde had much trade value outside of, you're going to piece for him. You get maybe kind of the way that, and people can look at one of those trades from the 2023 deadline and say, well, you got Tekoa Roby. I mean, he might be a future frontline guy. I don't think at the time you were even getting half of a Tekoa Roby for Erick Fedde. But True. Your point that we kind of hashed out back and forth, I wish I wouldn't have even responded on Twitter. I wish I would have just said, hey, get on your microphone. We're doing this, because we now already kind of have a better idea where one another was coming from. But my thought was, John Mozeliak isn't spending, and knows he can't from ownership, the $5 million for Quintana in March, or the $5 million for Kyle Gibson in March. And it would be a risk to go into March without having those sort of positions in their rotation locked up. You're basically waiting to go, hope nobody else signs this guy that I would pay him $5 million, but I don't want to pay him more than that because I don't have a lot of money that ownership is going to allow me to spend. I think that Fedde was kind of integral to where the Cardinals were approaching the season. Obviously, now at the end of June, we can say nobody's been hurt in the rotation. I thought about going through 29 other MLB teams' transaction logs to see if anybody else has had this. And I was like, no, that's insane. For some reason, I started with the Twins, and I was like, okay, Pablo Lopez was on the IL. Let's go to the Royals. Just like do the AL Central first. And then I was like, that's insane. I'm just going to respond and say, probably no other team has had this happen, where the Cardinals have not had one pitcher on the injured list yet. And Steve mentions it. Yeah, I think they kept Fedde because the depth is so thin. When you think about guys like Quinn Matthews, who I don't think is quite ready yet, in March, we're all going, Quinn Matthews, let's go. Let's get him up. He's part of the depth. Like, we know a lot of the AAA depth has been tested, has not been consistently healthy. And so I feel like Fedde, when they traded for him in July, that was the guy, like, hey, for $7 million, at least I know I've got him, and I'm Mo, and I don't want to have the bottom drop out on my 25 rotation. Your thought was explore some of the other guys in the market, and you named Quintana, which I think was actually a pretty good ad. He ended up being like, once he's signed, everybody goes, oh, crap. Like, of course, that's going to be a great deal. It's going to screw the Cardinals, too.
Well, also, I mean, they were in I mean, I think it was Derek Gould reported a lot of the offseason. They kept in tabs of Kyle Gibson the whole time. I mean, Lance Lynn was looking for a job till the very end, and then decided to retire because he didn't have a contract. And so it's like they knew there were guys who, like, go back to the last offseason where they go out and target Kyle Gibson and Lance Lynn, who wanted to be in St. Louis before they even called Sonny Gray, and then almost miss out on Sonny Gray because they prioritized bringing those two in first, which is still mind-boggling to me why you don't call Sonny Gray to make sure he knows you're interested. But beside the point.
It's a great point, though. Like, the fact that it almost didn't materialize. His intro press conference, I remember him saying that, and I was like, I had to look around the room. I was like, was that real? Because, like, we all knew they were signing Sonny Gray.
Yeah.
They didn't know. He didn't know. It was interesting. Continue.
And it's just like, it's not rocket science that if you want to go after a guy, you should probably let him know, hey, we're interested in you. We might be trying to take care of the business first. And also, too, it's like, wouldn't you want to get the top guy and fill out the depth later? I don't know. Anyways, it just doesn't make sense to me. But even like, so we joked about on Twitter a little bit, like, oh, I expected Mo to go do something creative to go get Jose Quintana. It's like, honestly, the bar for creativity there is extremely low to me. If for them, especially in an off season where they ended up not moving Sonny Gray or Wilson Contreras, and the Arenado stuff was slow as molasses because there's only like 4 teams that actually could have made it happen. And at any given time, there was like 1 or 2 that were talking to them, but it wasn't like they were in negotiations 24/7. It was like, hey, let's wait on Bregman. So as you're sitting around waiting on Bregman, and I know Mo does more than just sit there for Nado's deal, but could you not have explored stuff like this? That's what I don't understand. I get that it does add some risk if you moved Erick Fedde in the middle of November and you're waiting until January or February to sign guys, but this isn't unique to this offseason where there's veteran starters looking for a job when February comes around. That happens every single year. Is it a guy that maybe would have had the floor that we thought Erick Fedde had? Maybe not, But again, we're seeing Erick Fedde right now. After this start, he's going to have an over 4 ERA. His xFIP and xERA are among the worst in baseball going into the start. I would love to see what it is after. Yeah. So like he's been bad anyway. So like it's not like they can. I'm not coming at this from the perspective of he's a mid-3s ERA guy carrying the rotation right now. I get that.
He's like a 4. I think we thought he'd be a 4, and now he's a 4.1. I actually don't think that's as bad as others believe. Like he was a 1.17 ERA plus before tonight. Not sustainable. I totally understand that. And look, it wasn't sustained. Here he is now dropping back to being like a league average. That 117 is probably, whoever's got the update, it's probably 103. Just adding that for those kind of like because this is what started the debate tonight on my end, was we talked about it on the post game for STL Sports Central, where somebody said, oh, we really lost the Edman trade. And I was like,
nope.
He's got a 104 OPS plus. Fedde's got a 104 ERA plus, and the Cardinals felt they needed a pitcher. Your point, though, which is like, it's fair. Initially, I was like, they're not spending even $5 million this offseason. They got Maton for like $2 million. But if they had traded away the 7.5 from Fedde and not had to eat any, then they could sign somebody back. But that's like having to do stuff in Mo's last season, bro. Like, what are you doing to the man?
Wild, I know, right? You get to stay on you get to stay on and get paid for another year, and you're expected to do something with it.
Your co-host Andrew, not a fan of Erick Fedde. I take it based on this conversation.
So actually, it's kind of funny because we did a predictions episode, and Andrew couldn't make it. So he just posted this video where I read his prediction. It was Erick Fedde would regress and not even warrant a top 25 prospect. I remember laughing at him, it's not going to be that bad. But so there's a comment earlier that I remember seeing in the chat, and I can't highlight them, but someone said something like, this is an overreaction to tonight's start. For me, this is something I've been saying since the very moment they announced that this is the
I believe you.
It's Erick Fedde is the perfect guy to trade. In that, if at the time when they made the deal, and honestly, I don't know how far back they knew they were going to do this reset. Maybe at the deadline even they knew. And I'm guessing they probably did have inclinations.
I think Mo was braced for it, I think. Like, if we don't make the playoffs, if Tommy Pham doesn't guide us to and then a month later he wasn't on the team because like, get me out of here, like the Happy Gilmore scene. If we don't do that, then we might be stepping back, and I might need to brace for impact, because it's hard for me to make a lot of trades. And if I don't have any money to sign Lance Lynn again, then oh boy. So that to me was the impetus behind Fedde, which I think he knew in July, to your point.
For sure. And so at the time made sense, especially if you're potentially, because again, if they didn't do a reset thing, like Fedde does make perfect sense for the kind of roster they wanted to put together to be competitive in 2025. And I understand.
In fairness,
like, and they have been competitive. I would just argue that they probably could have been competitive without Erick Fedde. And so then you made this point earlier, and I think it makes so much sense, right? They weren't going to get a boatload. They weren't going to get even something. I don't think whatever they would have gotten for Erick Fedde wasn't going to move the needle for people. And they're probably going to get super annoyed in the moment, be like, this is what Tommy Edman turned into, was some organization's 17th ranked prospect. But when have the Cardinals really ever cared about optics? Okay. Like, I think they do things that don't really care about that side of it, the Twitter reaction. They could have moved Erick Fedde for whatever value you get, which I still think is more than nothing. It's not Matt Savants and Paul Dion, who Matt Savants has actually become a reliever they use now. I think it's more than that. And so you do something like that. You bring in Jose Quintana or Cal Gibson, which probably had a similar floor and similar production wise as Erick Fedde. And even in the offseason, like, I would have loved Jose Quintana to replace him, but I didn't think he'd be this good. But I think you could have probably expected a 4.45 ERA from Jose Quintana. And guess what? That's what you're getting from Erick Fedde right now. So that's where I come back to around on this, and that if there were teams genuinely interested in trading for Erick Fedde rather than signing these other guys, why not make that kind of flip in that kind of offseason? I can't really be convinced the reason not to do it. I understand you made the Fedde trade for this reason, but especially when you moved in this direction, it just seems like this was the way to go. And they had all the time in the world in this offseason to make it happen, and they didn't. And I don't get it.
Yeah. In the first place, when we were debating back and forth on Twitter, that I thought I had you was, I'm like, look, we can't pretend that Michael Mcgreevy was going to be in the rotation and then nobody else was going to get hurt. And we knew that all along. Yeah. But as it was mentioned in the comments already that, well, Steven Matz was technically a starter in spring and probably deserved a chance to be in the rotation, but he's also now been a really important part of the bullpen. Sure. So like, it's very difficult to battle with your old takes from a few months ago, because you know new information and you have to try to be intellectually honest about what we know now. And now I'm like, okay, ask me a week ago and I'm like, damn, really good that Steven Matz is in the bullpen and not a starter. When for the first couple of months, I was like, man, it's kind of bogus that he had a good spring. He's in a contract year and they're not letting him start. Well, now his arm's falling off, it seems. And so we're like right back to where we began, like, don't really expect much out of Steven Matz. But bringing up Gibson and Lynn is interesting because Gibson wanted to be here in the offseason. He was kind of waiting and going, well, hopefully, the money can work out. And obviously the Cardinals kept Fedde. They kept everybody. They had more starters than they knew what to do with. And they had Mcgreevy, who they wanted to get into the mix. And so they weren't going to go out and add that extra guy, even though under normal circumstances, we were like, you could afford to add an extra guy because when 2 or 3 get hurt in spring, like always happens, you'll still be covered. But they have been the healthiest. I'm not going to even finish that sentence because I don't want to jinx it, but which I don't believe in jinxes, but people will accuse me and then it's going to be a whole thing. But the one that's interesting is Lynn, because he was actually pretty dang good. And I remember last year, I'm saying, like, his numbers were solid. Yeah. I remember when he announced his retirement on the podcast with his wife, he kind of mentioned, like, I talked to some teams, the money wasn't quite there. And so the conversation was like, do I stay ready for a June showcase or do I pack it in? And I thought it was cool that he talked about the value of, like, I want to be in the clubhouse and integrate. I don't want to be like a mercenary that comes in midway because I don't know the guys. And then it's a whole thing. The Cardinals, were the Cardinals the team lowballing Lance Lynn, like trying to get him back, or did they not ask because they had Fedde and they had all these other guys like Steven Matz and Miles Michaelis? I think it's like really compelling fly on the wall stuff
for sure.
But I do think it boils down to the level of creativity. And like, I've been there for years. I've been thinking in the offseason, like, here are the 3 moves they could make and it would be so great. And then it's like, we're going to make 3 moves. And then, they just don't happen. So I think I had lowered my standard of creativity in my brain to the extent that I was like, well, come on, Fedde, they weren't going to trade Tommy Edman away for Fedde and then just have him for the stretch run of 2024. The whole point was to do it for this year, which I still believe was true. I believe they believe it was true. If Fedde had real value in March, I think they could have considered it. But then the scariness of knowing you might have to do 2 other things after you do that first thing to make it all fit together, I think is probably somewhat real when it comes to this Cardinals front office. So let us know in the comments who's winning. This guy said I'm Brenden, but he says I'm right and that he thinks you're great, but that this one is the wrong take. I assume coming in, most people would disagree with me because Erick Fedde gave up 900 runs tonight and 3 homers to the Cubs. So, like, I know that the timing isn't great for me to go, they should keep Erick Fedde forever.
Yeah.
But I'm just thinking that when they made that trade, it was with this year in mind because maybe specifically they don't want to have to do other stuff.
For sure.
Let's do minimal stuff when we know that the resource of money isn't going to be something that we have a lot of. And I don't want to keep having to talk to Bill about here's why we need to do 3 other things in a year where, like, we're probably going to win 79 games anyway. So who cares?
Yeah.
They can't afford to think that way. They run the team. But I think that there might have been a little bit of that in the decision process.
I also think, like Allison just put in the chat, like, I see both your points. And at the end of the day, I think that's part of why this is a kind of a fun debate to me, is that even though I'm firmly in this camp, I don't think your points are irrelevant or don't make sense. Like, I get that side of it. I just advocate for the other side harder and it makes more sense to me. I also think, like, I think someone put in the chat, like, I don't know how much we're getting back for for Tommy Edman. Like, if the Cardinals held on to him, and I mean, let's be honest, like, if they fall out of the race in September, they're probably not bringing him back anyways. They're probably just like, hey, stay home, make sure your wrist is fine. Maybe they bring him back on the field to rebuild some value. I'm not sure what happens with that, but he doesn't go on the NLCS run. And if they try to move him in the offseason, I don't think you were sitting on some haul either for that. So the initial trade, the frustration to that, I still won't get. I also want to give you credit too. You decided to come on and do this debate after a terrible Fedde start. And so you're giving me home field advantage with something like this. But I will say again to the chat, like, I would have made the same argument the day he basically did the complete game shutout against the Washington Nationals, because at that time I still was like, hey, great, I love he had a great start there. Probably shouldn't have been on the roster this year, and I would held to those takes the whole time. And so
and I think you are legit. That's why we do a podcast.
Yeah, and I know you're not questioning that.
No, look, if there's a take that you had before that wasn't right, you won't hide from it. And you might try to explain it or whatever the case might be, but you won't hide from it and like, oh, I never said that. Andrew's chiming in, like, they losing depth like Zach Thompson and Sem Robertsa is part of that too, where, like, if we imagine a starter going down early in the season, you would have been like, all right, Matz has enough built up in his arm, like, just put him out there. The left-hand side of the bullpen would have been pretty rough for the last 6 weeks without him, but, like, you could have done that. And then Mcgreevy. So, like, they had 7 that you felt decent about. And I would think if most people were honest, Miles Michaelis has exceeded their expectations this year from what because people are like, you got to cut Michaelis in February and just pay him his money and let him walk to Marlins camp. Like, doesn't matter. Just let him get out of here. And I was like, I'm going to let it play out in April because you don't know what's going to happen. This is the first time since I started covering the Cardinals in 2016 that they were clean through spring training with like MLB active roster pitcher injuries. So the fact that we're still in late June and they haven't had those pop up is remarkable. And I actually think a lot of it, there will be times, and you guys probably hear a lot of this and talk about a lot of this on your podcast, which is Dealin the Cards. Make sure to subscribe. There are times where, like, why did they take Mcgreevy out after 76 pitches? Why did Fedde not go deeper? Why don't they use Sonny on regular rest when they could give him extra rest? Like, I think it's kind of weird the more I think about it. Grant Salzman brought this up to me on our postgame for STL Sports Central. Like, why isn't Sonny pitching tomorrow where you could get him at home? Yes, it would be on regular rest. And I'm like, well, they want to buy him the extra day. But the more I think about it, I'm like, and there may be an explanation for this. I haven't covered a game since Monday. So if it's been talked about and I'm not aware of it, sorry. But it's one of those where it's like Sonny's ERA is double on the road what it is at home. Yeah, I would rather have him pitch, let alone it's the Cubs versus an AL team, but just pitch him at home because you're probably going to get a better outcome. I don't know why. Yep. It's just, is Busch that much of a pitcher's park that you're going to get the benefit of it? But although maybe the way home runs are flying out in this series right now, you don't want to touch it. Whatever the juju is, the mojo is.
But it was like that last year too. Last year he had terrible road splits. So this isn't a 2025 thing.
Yeah. So that's why I was like, I wonder, what's going on there. I don't even know what my whole point with this was, but it's fun talking to you again. I know that like we never said, oh, we're canceling philosophical differences. Yeah, we got busy. And so we haven't done it in a while, but now we have a real philosophical difference. And so it's fun to kind of jump in there. What do you think about, I've seen this a little bit in the comments. Yeah. Erick Fedde, trade him now before the deadline, and the team arguably gets better because slide Mcgreevy in there. And Mcgreevy gave up almost as many runs yesterday as Fedde did today, but people love Mcgreevy and he's the shiny new toy. And I like Mcgreevy too. When the Cardinals basically didn't think much of him a couple of years ago and they're like, he's down in AAA. I think he's had to kind of prove himself again to them that like, he needs to be on our radar, because once Mozeliak said his name in January of 23, I want to say like Mcgreevy and Graceffo are coming. And then like they kind of both stalled out that year at AAA. I feel like they kind of needed to be shown more from both of those guys before they got back on the radar. But what do you think about the idea that with where the Cardinals are right now, my stance, and I get it, your fan base on Dealin the Cards probably more geared towards saying sell the short-term assets and build for the future, because that's a lot of correct me if I'm wrong. I feel like your fan base, young people hip to like the fan graphs and kind of stuff. Hip. And so they're like, well, hip, probably not a very hip word, but break my hip. I'm so old. But I feel like people look at that and say, we're not winning the World Series this year. Trade away the expiring contracts, get whatever you can, do a deadline like 2023, and don't hold Helsley if he's your best asset. What do you think about that? And then slide in the notion of, if they're not sellers, could you still trade Fedde, because you might have a realm in which you're clearing a spot for Mcgreevy and you can get better that way?
Yeah, I mean, going into the season, that was my stance, is that you sell those expiring assets. You could, like Stephen Matz made sense to hold on to me because you could convince me he's going to build his value up, which has happened this year.
Kind of did that until recently.
And I wasn't like, if again, we don't get to see what offers they got. So I have no idea, like to your point, I don't know what teams are calling on Erick Fedde or Ryan Helsley, but if there was something of fair value for Ryan Helsley, I got making the move then. But I saw the point of holding on to him. And I'm not just saying this because of the Erick Fedde start tonight. Erick Fedde is the name that all offseason I kept saying over and over again. This is the guy I don't understand holding on to. Nato, they couldn't control. Sonny Gray and Wilson, they couldn't control. Michaelis, they couldn't control. Matz, I did get why they held him. Also, if you want to have depth, that makes sense. They hold a guy like that doesn't have value on the trade market. Ryan Helsley can convince me it could have been better at the deadline. Right now, and especially once the season starts, we know that most of the time trades kind of stall out till July. And so I've kind of held the stance that let's see what the team is in July. And if they're in it, you're not really getting anything for those guys anyway. So I don't see the reason of pulling out at that point. But going into the year when it just felt like, hey, you're crossing your fingers a lot here to be competitive. Don't do that. Just go ahead and get what you can for those assets, especially Erick Fedde at that moment. To your point about Michael Mcgreevy, I want to see Michael Mcgreevy in the rotation, but I personally feel like I have realistic expectations for it in terms of I don't think he's going to be much better than what Erick Fedde is right now.
Who's his closest comp in the current starting five? Who is Mcgreevy's closest career comp? If you had to say, if I had to pin
I think you kind of hope he's Miles Michaelis.
I was going to say
Erick
Palante.
Fedde. Oh yeah, like Palante. Yeah.
Like he's got a deeper repertoire than Palante, but he's going to pitch to contact and going to need some of that. Like he'll have a little bit of swing and miss that he has kind of introduced over the past calendar year.
Yeah.
But our guy Mcgreevy was not this guy coming up missing a ton of bats. I mean, he's going to challenge you in the zone, but he's not going to miss a ton of bats and strike out a ton of. He could be a 1 strikeout per inning guy, I think, at his ceiling as a big league pitcher. But like Palante has to really pitch to contact, and he's a ground ball guy. That's why I kind of make that comp as well.
Yeah.
Just to say, do I think he's going to come and have a 4.5 ERA where Palante is? No, I think he can be better than that. I think Palante can be better than that. But I think we're on the same page there with Mcgreevy, where like everybody's like, oh, he's a pitching prospect. He's young. I haven't seen him. Then he's got to be better than Michaelis. He's probably an ace. I'm like, I think stylistically, if he's a good, sturdy ass number 3, you're like, okay, we got something.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, if Michael Mcgreevy ends up being a number 3 starter for the St. Louis Cardinals any year, that is a huge success because especially you talked about it, like he stalled out in 2023. And at this point, like when he made his spot start last year, I remember saying out loud, Michael Mcgreevy, like he's getting a start.
People
like
felt that way. Yeah.
And then he shoved, and I was like, "Oh, okay, Michael Mcgreevy," and then he just kept shoving, and it was
he's getting it done. Like, people didn't really have high thoughts about him at the time.
We like to call him Michael McDreamy over on Dealin the Cards.
I like that.
But like, he isn't like, if we're actually being honest, he's not some incredible frontline starter at some point. But to the same reason that Erick Fedde holds value for the St. Louis Cardinals team at $7.5 million at the back end of your rotation, rotation, how much more value do you get a guy on a pre-arb contract who is doing that? Because I think we talked about on podcasts before where until Andre Palante, the Cardinals hadn't developed a homegrown starter for the rotation forever. So even if they can have a couple guys like that in their rotation, it allows them to allocate money elsewhere in a way that every offseason they've had to give $18 million to Miles Michaelis, $12 million to Lance Lynn, $12 million to Kyle Gibson, and have one of the highest paid rotations in baseball, even though the ceiling of it is fairly low. So yeah, I don't think this rotation actually gets all that better having Michael Mcgreevy in it over Erick Fedde. I think the only shot in the dark you have of an internal upgrade to the rotation, and I'm saying it's a shot in the dark because it's truly like asking a lot of those guys, is if somehow you just brought up a Quinn Matthews, or in a month and a half, 2 months, if Tekoa shows something in AAA and you say, let's see what happens. But I'm not advocating for that because that's a low percentage chance that those guys are going to be ready and shove at the major league level, not even just to be serviceable, let alone be a difference maker at this point. I don't think either guy's shown anything at the AAA level yet to say they're ready for that kind of shot. That's the only way I think this rotation gets better internally during the season. Who knows? Maybe they pursue some kind of upgrade at the deadline. I'm still skeptical what adding means to this team. I think adding more so means not subtracting. Maybe adding a bullpen arm, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think you need a strikeout bullpen arm, but like whatever you think they need, what are you giving up to acquire that? And is it trading from your future? And like, they don't want to do that. Now, is there a realm in which, and I don't want this player to be traded either, but I see a guy like Nathan Church just exploding at AAA, and I'm looking at the Cardinals going, well, clearly they want, for whatever reason, that they're still trying to find that right-hander off the bench, even though their whole bench right now is right-handed. But like when they have their A lineup out there, it's got usually 5, maybe 4, but if not, it's going to be 5 lefties in it.
Yep.
And so you don't want to be so left heavy necessarily. And like, especially in the outfield, Walker's the only right-handed bat, and he's on the IL right now. I'm no doctor, by the way. When you have appendicitis, don't they just take it out? But they didn't take it out. This is a lot for me as a non-doctor. Like, I'm trying to figure out what's going on there.
I was surprised by that.
Yeah, but
I never heard of someone doing that, but we'll see. But if he does get it taken out, he's probably, I know it's a side topic now.
No, it's like,
real quick. Like if he gets it taken out, he's probably out through the All-Star break because he's going to have to recover and build it up.
Weeks. I mean, that's a simple, again, no doctor.
To build back up to like playing shape and then to play through games. Like, I mean, maybe it's too much, but I wouldn't be surprised if you're not seeing him till mid-July at that point then, because we are at the end of June now. But
yeah, so I don't know. What were we talking about? I got
Erick Fedde at some point.
That started with that. I got into the Walker stuff, and I was just like, my mind went drifting away when it comes to the thinking about that.
Oh, Nathan Church. You were talking about
I'm not advocating trade him, but I think about last year the Royals made a trade where when they picked up Lorenzen, they traded their Omaha AAA closer, who they was like a 27-year-old reliever. Don't even remember his name, but it's like a non-prospect, but had good numbers in AAA. But clearly they didn't think he should be in the big leagues, and they traded him for a guy that they put on their team. Yeah. That feels like Nathan Church is I don't know if the Cardinals aren't ever going to use him. Maybe that's the type of guy you trade for a reliever, whether it's let's say he's got team control for 2026 as well. He'll replace Maton next year if Maton doesn't sign back. That sort of vibe. Using him as an example, there's a lot of other kind of cluttery guys on the 40-man roster where you're I don't really think you're ever going to necessarily materialize. But is there a team out there who goes, I will trade the reliever with a 5 ERA, but a 10.5 strikeouts per 9 for Luke and Baker because we don't have a first. We're just going to put him at first base and see if he can hit. Those types of deals that it's here, trade your trash for our trash. Nobody's trash. They're all lovely people and good players. But that's the idea is we're not talking about these big prospect trades. It's like a challenge trade of players that you kind of in either case, they're not really panning out where they currently are. That might be a way that you add if you're the Cardinals. But even that feels kind of creative. And again, the scope is sometimes limited in what these deals are. I would love for Mo to just in his last year, just be I'm just going to blow the lid off this thing and start doing some stuff. As long as Heim is kind of okay with it, don't ruin the future of the organization. But why not? You're going out with a bang. Just do some stuff.
It's kind of funny. I didn't think about this till now, but we've talked multiple times about how he doesn't get creative. But how did he acquire Erick Fedde? He made a 3-team trade at the deadline.
I believe it was basically the Cardinals knew that they wanted Pham and they wanted Fedde, and the Dodgers, because the Dodgers got involved in that, right? I think the Dodgers facilitated, not to say the Cardinals did none of the legwork, but it was basically the White Sox didn't want Tommy Edman. The Dodgers we want Tommy Edman, and the Cardinals are probably Dodgers, would you give them some prospects so that this little love triangle makes sense? And so I think that there was somebody else driving the steering the ship on that one, if I had to guess. And I think it rhymes with Through Friedman, because I think they probably were able to, at least with the Dodgers involved, you're okay, we're at the big kids table. We're gonna figure some stuff out. And everybody got what they wanted out of that deal.
Yeah.
The Cardinals did have to trade that teenager to the Dodgers, and we assumed he's gonna turn into somebody awesome.
Probably.
I already forgot his name, but that's fair. That was a pretty fun, creative trade. But man, it is so rare that those happen.
I think that's Cardinals, my point exactly, though. It's
they deserve that this July.
They made that rare trade to get Erick Fedde, so why couldn't they have had the forethought to say, we move him in the offseason and sign one of these free agent starters that is literally, his name is, it rhymes with, I was trying to do a funny rhyme, and now it's Kyle Gibson, all right? It's
okay, yeah.
He's literally waiting at the phone saying, I will come. I am ready.
No, he did. It was a landline. He was just sitting there like this.
And he already got paid, what was it, $1 million or $2 million of a buyout too from them too. So it's I don't know. I don't feel like he was probably scraping, was going to fight them much on the dollar amount there to get there. So it's just kind of funny to think through that. Me too.
That would have been good to get him back.
And for a guy, not that Erick Fedde can't do this. I'm not saying he can't be a mentor type, but Kyle Gibson clearly could have been a guy in that clubhouse, like Sonny Gray and Miles Michaelis. You already have on the pitching side a lot of those veterans, but clearly is a net positive for your clubhouse. So. Oh well.
I hear you. Well, I don't know that I've got a lot else. I told you originally 30 minutes. I know it's after 11 o'clock. There are a lot of fun comments in here for sure. What else are we missing? What else do we need to get into? What do you think of Kyle Leahy as a starter? Because I kind of think that would be interesting, although obviously now he's kind of fallen off a bit and he doesn't look like, the second coming or anything, but he does have an interesting repertoire. Kind of people thinking ahead to next year, because next year you'll have this a little bit Fedde, Michaelis, Matz will be gone. I think it gets honestly kind of fun because hopefully by then you've got some of the younger guys that we dream on that are going to be ready to go. But any thoughts on that? With Mcgreevy's got to be in this rotation next year. Matthews, you hope that he comes into spring with a chance to prove himself. Yeah. I still want to see them stretch Leahy out a little bit in the spring, and maybe he'll throw a starter's workload this year anyway, so he'll be on innings in a pretty good spot to be able to do it. I don't know.
I'm with you. And actually, I meant to give you credit for this earlier. You were talking through like the going into spring training, like who are the guys you could have penciled in the rotation, and none of us had John Mozeliak said it today on 101 ESPN. Matthew Liberatore was not in his ideal starting rotation this year, and then he earned the way in. So even going back to trading Fedde, like we have the foresight to know Libby ends up making the rotation. But that was a guy you're kind of like, what's going to happen?
True.
There?
Without him, it wouldn't have been 7, huh? It would have been 6. And then, like, if Matz is in your rotation, Fedde's on a different team, and like they didn't do the Libby thing. Mcgreevy's probably in there. Libby is your Matz out of the pen, but then you really don't have any depth beyond that because of what happened in April in Memphis.
So it does get tricky. But on the Leahy side of things, I think to the Matthew Liberatore side of it, personally, roster construction wise, building wise, it feels like relievers are that thing that you never really know what you're going to get from them the next year, and you can just throw a bunch of darts and try to build a bullpen. Otherwise, I would rather see if I can squeeze out a lot more value out of someone. To being even Kyle Leahy as a serviceable number 5 starter is probably more valuable than what he's giving the Cardinals in the bullpen this year. And it seems weird, but that's just kind of how baseball works. And to your point, like there are a lot of fun, interesting names next year, but like aside from Quinn Matthews, Jacob Roby, Michael Mcgreevy, which all even then are still risks. Like, is Tink Kent's really going to be ready next year? I don't know. Cooper.
Yeah, someone asked where's Tink Kent. He's thrown like 4 innings at AA so far. He was 4 good innings, but there's a lot to go on that front.
So I like the idea of stretching him out. In worst case, I don't think it'll be that hard for him to bounce back into a bullpen role. And then I know we talked about this earlier, but as you're looking through comments, like Kareem was just asking, good friend, and also on the Dealin the Cards.
I was going to bring up one of his comments next. Is this the one you were looking at?
Yeah, the Helsley one. And I mean, again, I kind of said it earlier, but I hope it seems like they were open. It doesn't seem like they didn't listen. I just am not surprised.
For the audio audience, Kareem asked, looking back, do you guys think the Cardinals should have been more open to trading Helsley in the offseason? And I know BK asked Mo that today on 101 ESPN. And his answer was basically no, like understand the question, but they weren't, he has no regrets. He believes Ryan Helsley has been very integral in like the fact that they're pushing for a playoff spot right now.
Yeah. Which I thought was funny from BK because I saw the chain of events. He took a comment from Twitter of someone who said they'll never ask the hard questions.
He used
the question that the guy wanted.
But this guy wants to know. So, I don't know if BK will see me say that, but if he does, I think it's funny. I'm just kidding.
But it's funny because a lot of the times the questions people say they want asked, it's like if you ask someone that, they're not going to give you
like you have 3 heads.
So it's like, do you want like any kind of substance to an answer? Or you just want them to stare at you. Anyway, so aside from the point, but I'm not surprised. Again, we don't get to see what was happening, but I'm not surprised that whatever offers came through weren't good enough to take on the risk of seeing, hey, let's see if we're a contender this year and Ryan Helsley can be a part of that. And if not, we're going to bank on the guy who's been an elite closer the last few years is going to be elite one more time, and we can flip him at the deadline when his value will truly be the highest. And it's just unfortunate that they've been in contention. He just has waffled, right? Like he hasn't been terrible.
Yeah,
but it's clearly not the same Ryan Helsley, and it's not just looking at the stats here. You look at that fastball, the sliders regress. Yeah, it's nothing special now, and and it's been kind of declining year by year. And then that slider, which you should truly be one of the best pitches in all baseball, is good but not great anymore.
It sometimes is great. It's not as consistent as it's always.
That's a better way of saying it. Yeah. And so it's like, okay, if they, again, at this point, I kind of doubt they're going to fall so far out of contention that they're selling guys at the deadline, but there's time. But if it did come to that, I don't like, you see Bob Nightingale, John Heyman, like whoever it is, they're always like Ryan Helsley, a top trade candidate. I'm like, who are they asking? Because I don't know what team looks at him right now. It's like, man, you know who I've got the top of my list? And like, not even just like, they could be a top target for someone, but you can't convince me he's one of the top 5 most talented. I guess talented,
but like
talented, yes, but productive, no. You cannot convince me that.
And the thing of it is, though, like I could see a realm in which 4 weeks from now, it clicks back in and Helsley's Helsley again, and then people would clamor, and like the Phillies would clamor. They don't get Alvarado for the playoffs. Like there are situations where you could see the benefit of it.
So can I flip this on to you?
Yeah, go ahead.
So instead of it being like, hey, should they have dealt him at the offseason, or should they be looking to deal with the deadline? Maybe my question to you is, even if they're in contention, is there some kind of puke point for another team where they come at, like the Phillies are so desperate that there's some kind of offer that makes you think, you know what? you got to make the deal, even though it's going to be unpopular in the clubhouse, potentially unpopular to the casual fan that's like, why are you trading Helsley? We're in first place in the NL Central right now. Is there a point where you have to make that move if you're Mo, or do you think like if they're in contention, it doesn't really matter? They can kind of say no, and we can't really question them on that.
I think the truth is, as long as Chaim Bloom doesn't like stand on top of the arch and say, hey, this offer is in hand, nobody's ever going to know. So if you're Mo, like, you don't have to share that, because that getting out publicly would not be great if you had like a true, like whatever the sexy name is. I think it was Jim Bowden put out like it's going to be the Tigers with Arenado and Helsley for like their best prospect or something.
It's not going to happen.
Like, wait a second. That's probably not.
But occasionally you do get like think back to Derek Gould in 2022, the offseason, where they're like chalking on Sean Murphy, and you've got him, you've got Toronto reporters who are kind of saying, here are the names that were being played around. Like that stuff could happen where it's August 3rd and it's like, yeah, the Phillies, I mean, it's not going to happen, but the Phillies did throw out Mcgreevy and the Cardinals waffled at. Like there is a world where that stuff gets out.
I was like, Alejandro Kirk is a stud. And then he like came to Busch Stadium this year and hit a bunch of home runs. This little guy just smacking homers. He's good. But that's what's fun about this, because we never know necessarily the full story, and something can even be reported. And it's like, I can trust the report, but there are probably contextual aspects that maybe never do come out. So I don't know. Like, I think if you can really think about getting a premium prospect, you think about the Brewers a couple of years ago when they did it with Hader, and like the clubhouse thing is something that you got to be able to get a handle on. I think Oliver Marmol, we come from the same side of the fence on Ollie. We both think he's good, unless you've changed since we've last spoken. But like, I think he could probably, find a way to keep the train on the tracks. But that's also one of those things where it's like, you do have a lot of diverse viewpoints and opinions. And he's talked a lot about on Gas House Gang on KMOX, how, this has been a year where the team has really coalesced and come together in a nice way. And so like, do you want to mess with that? If you're Ollie Marmol, you probably do not. I think even if Ollie Marmol would say Helsley, if he gave him the truth serum and said, yeah, okay, Helsley hasn't really been Helsley, and that's kind of something that's we elephant in the room that we have to work around. Even if he would tell you that with the truth serum, it doesn't necessarily change the fact that I think he knows the Cardinals are going to go as far as Helsley's going to help take him in the 9th inning. And you could be creative. You could go, all right, we're trading Helsley over here because we got a top 10 pitching prospect from that team's organization, from their top 30 list. But then we're going to go out and we're going to trade for somebody kind of like Phil Maton, and Phil's going to be our closer. And then we're going to get this new guy in the 8th. And it's like, we've done all this kind of stuff and we're better for it. And we also picked up a prospect. Like, it's creative. I could do it for you on MLB The Show in like 15 minutes, but it's like, it probably is harder to do in real life than maybe we sometimes give it credit for. And that's why it probably doesn't happen. And the clubhouse aspect of it too, it would be interesting though, like, because we know they're not re-signing Ryan Helsley. There's just he's not on the Cardinals next year. And that stinks, because it's been fun. I like the red lights that they put out when Ryan Helsley comes on the field. It's cool. Yeah. Like, that's a unique thing. And it's not just the lights. Like, he's a good dude. He's a good pitcher. He's been a Cardinal for a friggin' long time. And it's always kind of a bummer when those guys go because of the business side of it. But like, that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Maybe you give him a qualifying offer. Probably right now, you might be afraid that he would say yes. But like, there's some intrigue to that side of it too. And maybe you don't get anything for him and you get a playoff series or two and you go, man, I really wish that we would have traded Helsley, just like we should have traded Alex Reyes a few years ago. But like, there is value. I think value in making the playoffs, like value in saying, man, 2022 was cool. It was only a couple of games, but it was cool. Would love to see Busch Stadium like that again.
Yeah.
There's value in that, even if you don't win a World Series. And that's where I think some in the fan base don't agree. They're like, no, I see the Dodgers. I see the lineups these other teams have. It's not our year. And so people want to kind of kick the can down the road. They're more patient than I think they would really be if push came to shove and you're like, oh, the playoffs is within grasp. We could be there,
Yeah, for sure. And then also too, we're not talking about like they're sitting on rental Juan Soto right now. And it's like, you could get a lot. I mean, well, okay, not this Juan Soto this year, but you know what I mean? Like a prime bat where it's like, they're going to give you a ton of value for this and you're not moving that. You're talking about Ryan Helsley, Erick Fedde, stuff like that, where you're not like whatever they get. I think people are going to be shocked how low it is compared to what their expectations are. So I think that plays into it. And then also, like, you're talking about building toward the future. Like, don't you want Mason Wynn to get playoff experience this year? Don't you want Lars Newbar back on that stage and Brenden Donovan on that stage? Don't you want Victor Scott? Like, that's probably really helpful to build confidence in that team and momentum moving forward as well. So I do think, like, obviously we don't want to be going at 2 hours here. So maybe if we ever want to circle back up in the future, like I do think there's questions that I think people are asking now and I think it's too soon to be asking or trying to answer for July, because there's people like, do you trade Newbar? Do you trade Burleson? Stuff like that. But I do think this offseason presents a really interesting conundrum of, okay, you did get the year to see the runway. Do you start moving guys who performed well to get value, or do you move on from the guys that struggled, knowing that you're not going to get anything for them, but you're committing to Bertelsen and his breakout, assuming Newbar is going to continue to be who he has been his whole career, not what he was for a 2-week stretch. I think that's an interesting topic going forward. How do they decipher who they build around, and do they continue to give runway to some guys and sell high on others, or do they just?
Sorry, what?
You're not. Wait.
Brenden Donovan. What? Sorry, something happened to my mic. It was messed up.
You're not suggesting it, are you?
No, I'm suggesting. What are you suggesting? What do you think I'm suggesting?
I hope you're not suggesting. I know you're team Brenden Donovan. I hope you're not suggesting.
No, you said. I heard you say build around, and that was the only part I heard. And so I
thought you were saying like, oh, do you?
No,
no way.
They already messed up though. They shouldn't have done the ARB thing with him. Like. And look, I know that there was a realm in which they were kind of Tampa Bay raising it a little bit. We're like, hey, we need to do some ARB on these guys. But now it's like they're not 3 years away from contending.
No.
And so you don't have to, like, there was a world in which if they're 10 games under, like we did that podcast, Josh, like probably a year and 2 months ago or so, where we're like, what could happen to the 2025 team if 24 doesn't go well? And we baked it all out. And like a lot of it kind of happened. Like Chaim Bloom is going to be the next one up.
Yep.
And so like a lot of that had been put into motion, but it's also kind of like coming into all of this. Chaim Bloom's not here yet. And this is kind of the prove it year of how close are we and how rebuildy does the next 2 to 3 years need to look? And turns out like not very rebuildy. You're pretty close, if not there already before, which is exciting. I think if you're a Cardinals fan, like look down at Springfield, Missouri and see what already Rob Cerfolio and these guys are doing to make the pitching development of this organization go from like completely outdated to actually having a shot to produce some guys like Hanso Rincon comes up and throws 11 strikeouts in Double-A. Like there's a lot going on down there that I think you can credit the infrastructure changes that were made in the offseason for really jumpstarting the development of some of those pitchers. But Brenden Donovan, Lars Nootbaar, I thought if they're 10, 12 games under 500, they could trade him next month. Like they could say, oh, we're 2-3 years away. Those guys aren't going to be around the next time we're in the playoffs. Just let's go. Let's have the fire sale and really restock, reload. They're not going to need to do that, in which case, like, think about which of the guys you're going to sign and do it. Like, I know that money was a thing this offseason where they didn't know that they could spend and they don't know what the revenues are going to be. That stuff's got to change. You got to, by October, you got to be like, here's the guys that we're signing. And also we're doing an early extension for Wynn. And also we're doing it for Victor Scott because I will pay for defense and whatever it ends up being on top of that. If the bats come around, then like, great, I got a bargain. If not, okay, it's the Michael Harris deal. And he's never making more than $12 million in a season. So who cares? Like, it's not that big of a deal. You take chances like that to build your core and to tell your fan base, hey, we're coming. Yep. So that's kind of my thought there. A lot of stuff that we just talked about, like what the future episodes. Andrew says, Brenden coming on our channel when? Let's get in the DMs and organize that and make sure we do that soon. Because I saw that earlier and wanted to know that we would end on this kind of note. And Kareem says we need philosophical differences to make a return. Go to duo. I agree. I think we got to figure some logistics out and then just probably do it because it is always good conversation and a fun change of pace from the other stuff that we've got going on. So
it's fun.
I think we figured it out. I think people hopefully enjoyed this debate, as it were. Like, I think we both kind of see where each other's coming from on the Fedde stuff. And if every time Fedde shoves, I'm going to be tweeting at Andrew. I'm going to be tweeting at you. If Imanaga shoves tomorrow, I'm going to be tweeting at Andrew. I never let him live it down. Never let him live it down. I'm like, this guy thinks Imanaga's not going to be good.
He's still on the train because I think when it like the other week he posted like Imanaga's xERA versus Miles Michaelis's.
He's outperforming.
Oh my gosh. Real quick, one thing on the Brenden Donovan thing, and you touched on it, but it's like not only did they miss the boat because he's already just increased his value because he's on an all-star,
which
all-star
told
campaign.
You it was coming.
It's like it was just you could see it from a mile away. You already missed out a year where instead of making $4 million, you could pay him more this year to keep the AAV going down lower in future years.
Yep.
You didn't do that. Now you're going to have to pay him more than you would have originally. He's a year closer to free agency. So when him and his agent are talking, the estimated value he's having each year that he's giving up money on is higher now than would have been last year. It just all around does not make sense. And then you look at Nootbaar, and it's like, okay, assuming, like, I'm just going to assume he has a kind of not a bad season, but he didn't necessarily break out in the way they would have hoped he was.
Right.
Then this offseason, it's like, okay, so do you pay that guy? Because he's not going to want to take a contract that's not like whatever he thinks he's valued. And you keep waiting and he's going to hit free agency, then you just lose him. So then you have to make this call where it's like, hey, if we extended him last offseason, we would have had more time to figure this out with him, but we didn't. Now we got to make a judgment call of, do we pay him market value? Do we risk losing him, or do we trade him for whatever he's worth right now? And I think it's just a poor position they put themselves in. When we can circle back to Erick Fedde, you could have said, hey, it's worth $7.5 million to me, and to not have this insurance starter, to have Brenden Donovan locked up for the next 5 years because I care about the long-term sustainability of this core, rather than making sure we have the pitching depth for a year where it's like, hey, we're hoping we can contend, but that's not the main point of this year. Anyways, we'll talk more in the future.
When in 2 years your outfield from left to right is like JJ Weatherholt, Victor Scott, and Ivan Herrera, just remember that the Cardinals, it didn't have to be this way, where like you could have had Nootbaar, Brenden Donovan. I don't know. The Nootbaar thing is interesting because just last week I was having people tell me that he's not good and never was good because of one slump. And the Donovan thing, though, really irks me because you knew another year off the UCL repair, he was going to be even better at the plate, and he has been. And you're a year closer to that free agency. Everything that you described is spot on. So bummed about that. We'll leave on this one. This 10 for 125 for win, I don't think it would even be that much. Like, not to lowball the guy, but now if it was 10 years, maybe it's in that conversation. But I think about like Christian Campbell, I'm going to comp a little more to Victor Scott. He just got $8 and $60 million guaranteed. And that is like a somewhat similar level of having proven it. And Victor's like a great defender. So I would pay up even a little bit more beyond that, because I think his bat could end up being just fine too. Mason is showing like league average bat that what if he develops into like a really good one? That's why I would want to pay him sooner rather than later. Is there like a number for you though? Like is 8 and 80 crazy? Is 8 and 100 crazy? Like, this is like math. I know I don't do math at night, but what do you think about Mason Wind and the number that Samuel threw out there?
He's not this next offseason, but the year after he'd be arbitration eligible. So you're talking about 5 years away from free agency. I kind of actually think that 125, this is all just me guessing off the cuff, wouldn't be that crazy, because I'm looking at that Corbin Carroll deal, and it was
10 years, especially.
Yeah, Corbin Carroll's was 8 for 135, but he was a top prospect in all baseball. You knew that dude was going to be a star.
He's hit already. Like, we've seen him hit. I don't remember when he signed that, though.
He came up in September, and they signed him in the offseason, but even then, they knew this guy was about to be a star. So I wouldn't be shocked. I'd have to sit down and try to comp some things. I wouldn't be shocked if 10 for 1. It doesn't seem like a crazy number to me. I could see it being lower. I could also see it being slightly higher. It's crazy
only because they're not going to do a 10-year deal for anybody, because they're the St. Louis Cardinals. Chourio was 8 and 82 before he ever played in the big leagues. Like, we've seen Win play a little bit. I don't think we're terribly far off. I do that contract, though. Like, I go through the motions of, like, what does it take? What are we doing? And, like, I'd plant my flag on Mason Win. I already had it planted on Brenden Donovan when I stood at his locker in Jupiter and heard him say, yeah, you heard some things in the ARB room that you didn't really know were going to be thrown against you. And it's like, and he's not that he's holding a grudge, I don't think, but they bungled that, in my opinion. This has been good. We're going to have to do more, because we just come up with topics for days whenever we are on here like this. So appreciate everybody for tuning in. This will be on the B Schaeffer Daily audio podcast feed as well. And then we'll try to bring back the philosophical differences feed as we go along. Wherever that lands, I think is a good idea. So, Josh, thank you for last minute.
Of course.
I was like, this would be a good podcast topic. I don't have to talk exclusively about the fact that they lost 8-0. Sounds like a preference to me. So thank you for your time. Shout out anything you want to shout out here at the end of where people can follow your stuff.
Yeah, of course. Again, Dealin the Cards. Go check out our YouTube channel. And then we've got Birds on the Farm with Kareem. He brings his prospect expertise to that. Lately, he's been doing breakdowns of like some of the college players, high school players you're going to see in this draft. And it's awesome content because outside of like Baseball America and stuff like that, you don't really have a lot of people who actually like are in depth and know what they're talking about, that kind of stuff. Other than just like, oh, I saw this mock drafted name. So you get like, I'm sitting there learning from him the whole time. So it's really fun content to have on the channel. And again, we'll be bringing back philosophical differences. I think we all can agree on that at this point. So looking forward to that. Thanks for having me on. This was Andrew and I originally were going to go live tonight, hoping he
wants to know. He wants you to say something about Redbird Rundown. Is that what's going on?
That was back before I joined with them. I did an audio only podcast because I was like, I'm gonna get into audio. I feel like that's where things are going.
Oh, I remember this now. Yeah,
and I did Redbird Rundown, and I even did YouTube. I did like 2 versions of it, on, like 2 of the episodes on YouTube where I made my own thumbnails. It was terrible, and so I get memed by him all the time for that. So it's very honestly like big shout out to Andrew because like I hop on the podcast and I just talk. That's all I have to do. He runs our social media. He does all the graphics. I mean, he grinds. And when he was in overseas for a couple weeks, like I covered on some of that stuff, and it's no joke. So
yes,
big shout out to Andrew. Big shout out to Sandy, who's getting married on Saturday. It's been fun.
Congratulations, a lot of fun.
And also Kareem, who's
and I was going to mention Kareem too. Kareem, if you and Josh talked about it a little bit, but if you are interested in more prospect stuff, he puts out a lot of really good stuff to check out. So, all right, I think we're finally done. Never know how to end a show. That's courtesy of Charlie Marlowe. But this has been the B-Shape Daily edition of Philosophical Differences. Appreciate you guys, and stay tuned for more. Stay tuned to both of our Twitter feeds, etc., to figure out exactly what's coming next. We used to do it on Fridays. We'll map something out to make it work. Appreciate you, Josh, and we'll talk to you next time on B-Shape Daily /Philosophical Differences. Peace.